Let's continue to build our future section. So the first thing that we're going to do with this is white space. You surely remember that white space is a very important thing, and so let's define white space between sections for all sections at the same time. So let's format the section, and I will do it here right in the reusable components part of our code. And we will put that white space between the sections using padding. Now you maybe say that to put a space between elements we use margin, and that's actually right, but I will use padding because I will later have I'm planning to have some sections with background colors, and in order to preserve that background color, we need to make sure that the space is inside of each of the boxes. You will see that later. So I want a lot of white space, so let me say 80 pixels at the top and on the bottom. 0. So 0 at left and right, so no margin. Great, so this is a lot of white space. And it looks great, right? So the next thing is to format the H2 heading here. So I want the H2 heading to look quite similar to the H1. For example, I want it to have the same text transform, the same letter spacing, and the same font weight. So what do I do in order to achieve that? I just group the similar properties just as I showed you before. So H1 and H2 will have some things in common. H1 and H2. So this is for H1 only. This is for H1 only. And this as well. And also this. But the rest we can leave here for both. Now on H2 I want another font size. Not so big, of course. And I will say maybe 180%, so it's not so big. And maybe a word spacing of 2 pixels. And I also want to align it on the web page inside of the row. So I will make I will make text align center. Yeah, that looks much better than before. Now let's put some space between this. So again we use some margin at the bottom. 30 pixels should be a good value for this. And now I want some nice little yellow line between the H2 and the text. And as I told you in the first lecture, we will learn to put some content on a website just with CSS. So we do that using the after pseudo class. So after is just some stuff that will appear after the H2, such as the name indicates. And now we can style this just as if it was a normal element. We can say we want it to display as a block element, and we want a height of 2 pixels, so it will be a nice little line with 2 pixels height. And we want it to be orange. and you already know where to find that orange. It's up here. Paste it here. And now, a very important thing, whenever we do a after zero class, we have to specify its content. And in this case, we don't want any words to appear. So we put a space in there. Now the width of that line, of that box, will be 100 pixels. And alright, let's see how that looks. So some things is not right here because we want it centered. And of course, the reason for that is that we have to say that we want it centered. And we do that such as we did before. So we say we want the margin 0 and bottom 0 and left and right auto. And now this should work. And also we need to specify some margin between this and the bottom of 30 pixels as well, such as we have it here. So let's take a look at this. Alright, but we still don't have the margin that we want. And yeah, the reason is because this has to be margin top. So there's a margin between the H2 after, so this block, and the actual H2, and then 30 pixels after that orange block we inserted. And this is exactly what we want. Now next up we have this text here. So let's define a nice paragraph style for this. So this can also go here into the reusable components. That will make a little subsection here for paragraphs. So this is called long copy. And one thing we will do is to change the line height, which is one thing that we learned in the typography lecture. So line height should be between 120 and 145%, and I will actually use the highest of the values because I really like some line height. Now one thing that you notice is that this line is very long, because another rule of typography was that this line should have at most like 2 complete alphabets, and this is way more. So let's make this paragraph a little less wide. So I will say that the width of this paragraph should be 70%. Now the problem is that it will no longer be centered. So a good idea for this problem is that instead of trying to centering it, is to do another thing, which is this. We say that the margin left should be 15%. And why 15? Because the total width would be 100%. So if we want this centered, the remaining 30% should be distributed to both sides. So 15% left, 15% right, plus the 70%, which is our width, makes 100%. Okay? So let's see what it looks like. Okay, and this is way better now. Maybe you already noticed that sometimes I have to scroll the web page a little bit in order to make our changes appear here. And I actually have no idea why this happens. It must be something with the connection between brackets and the browser. So don't worry. Maybe if you also experience this, just scroll your website a little bit and then the change will appear. Now the next thing is to format these boxes. And the first thing I notice immediately is that these columns are a little too close to each other. So I should give them some some padding here, like for example 1% padding. So let's go back to CSS, and now how should we do this? So we should never ever change anything of these classes which come from our grid. So what we can do here is to add another class and then format that class, and I will call it box, because not here, because you know it's like a box where all the futures go. And I will actually reuse this box probably later, so let me just put it here. I will call it box, and I just want to have it a padding of 1%. Alright, and that looks a little bit better now. Now these H3 elements here, they should be similar to this one, but a little smaller. So I do all the heading elements look similar, so that we maintain like a similar style all throughout the web page. So I want these three attributes to be always the same in all these three headings. And for the H3 ones in specific, it should also be a little bigger than the normal font size, but only slightly bigger. So maybe 100%, sorry, and 110% should be fine. And then also some space between the H3 and the paragraph. So let me say margin bottom, for instance, 15 pixels. Alright. Now I really don't like that this text doesn't fit in one line. So what can we do about that? Let's go back, and maybe the reason for that is this letter spacing. So if we take that away from the H3, and I do this by pasting it here in the H1 and in the H2 headings, we will see, so now the H3 no longer has the letter spacing. So let's see what happens. Okay, now it fits just as we wanted it. So this is much better. Now as for the text in here, I think this is a little too big actually. It looks a bit overwhelming, don't you think so? So what we can do here is to make the text a little bit smaller and raise its line height. So we didn't give it any name because maybe we don't need to, because you can see here that it's a simple paragraph inside of the box. So you already can guess what I'm gonna do now, right? So I'm writing box, and then I'm selecting all the paragraphs inside a box. Very easy. So as I said, a smaller font size. I will choose 90% here, and again I'm going with a line height of 145%. That should look much better. So I think it's way more pleasant to look at. And the section already looks great, don't you think so? The only thing that we need to do now is to change these icons. So let's do that. And in order to do that, I will actually define a new class for all those icons, and I will call this icon big, because we will use some other icons down the road and they will probably not be as big as these, so let's just call these icons big icons. Makes sense, right? So I can just say I want paragraphs, here I want some icons. So you see, I'm really worried with keeping this code organized, and you will see when you have bigger projects this becomes incredibly important. So in order to make you get used to this is why I'm doing this. So let's define the icon big class, and as you know, this is an icon font, so it's really a font. So we can set its font size, for instance, and I will make it really big. I will start with 400%, and if it's too big we can always reduce that. And I also want this icon to display as a block, display block, so that it forces a line break, as you already know. I want it to be orange, so again, as if it was a real font, we can set its color, because color really means font color. So I will again copy this orange color that we're already used to and put it right here. And maybe a little margin between the icon and the heading. So margin bottom, of course, and let's say 10 pixels. And okay, I think we can see how this looks like. Okay, great. Well, the icons are probably a little too big, right? So I think, well, maybe 350%. And let's check it again. Yeah, that's better. So this is really designing in the browser. That's what I meant when I told you what designing in the browser was all about. It's trying, tweaking the CSS code and see what looks best and what works best in order to make our website as good as we can. So I think this section is ready. It looks great, right? And see you in the next section.